This is Stephen Brown broadcasting from Radio Free Coronavirus. This is the latest installation of Libertarian Heretic, which I am calling Big Country Libertarianism. Well, why am I calling it Big Country Libertarianism? Let's think about that for a second. Could it be that we live in a very big country, and this colors the assumptions of an awful lot of libertarians, I've noticed? Libertarians who often don't seem to be aware that libertarianism is in fact an international movement and has a very lively presence even in the parliaments of some countries. But it's a different flavor libertarianism than American libertarianism, and I think that has something to do with our size. So, how big is the United States? Well, the United States is, as countries go, third or fourth in area and third or fourth in population, depending. Which a distinction it shares with Russia, China, and Canada, which Canada, in spite of the map, is actually a very small country. It's large in area, a bit larger than we are, although a great deal of it in the north is frozen pretty much year-round, and population-wise, it's, I think, only about 20 million. So, out of an average of 194 countries, the average size is about Turkey. That's something like 767,731 square kilometers. Okay, so size-wise, an average country is about like Turkey, which is between the size of Texas and Alaska. Population-wise, it is between, however, Texas and California. Remember, California is the most populous state in the Union. Now, compared with some countries I'm familiar with, and which have colored my thinking of such, compared with Lithuania, Lithuania has a population of 2.79 million, an area of 65,700 square kilometers. That's a little bit larger than West Virginia. Okay. Now, Poland, where I spent many years, still own an apartment, fathered my first child. They're a country that is dear to me in many ways. Has an area of 312,679 square kilometers, which is a little larger than New Mexico. That's what they used to tell the Peace Corps boys there. A little larger than New Mexico, which is the fifth largest state in the United States, with a population of 38.6 million, which is a little smaller than California, our most populous state, I believe. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, what it means is that we have certain assumptions that we can, certain beliefs, which I think are only really supportable if you happen to be the citizen of a very large, powerful country. One of them is foreign policy, I call the naive isolationism of some libertarians. The idea, we don't need any friends. We don't need any friends. Maybe, I don't know. Could we sit in proud isolation? We have two neighbors, and two sea borders, basically. Our neighbor to the north are very nice people. I cannot for the life of me conceive of us ever getting into an armed conflict with them. Our neighbor to the south may be less so, but on the other hand, I don't, a Mexican invasion of the United States, which is happening right now. It just happens to be unarmed because they know that an armed invasion would be an exercise in futility. So, okay, can we sit in our proud isolation? Yeah, as people often misquoting, I believe, the intentions of George Washington when he advised friendship and trade with all nations, entangling alliances with none. It's that he did not want us to get involved in the wars of Europe at that time. Again, I think his view was probably a great deal more subtle than that soundbite that people like to quote. But okay, take it as a baseline. Never get involved with anybody else. Well, maybe we could. I don't know. In terms of military entanglements, maybe we could let the rest of the world go to hell. I mean, okay, so somebody seizes and blocks off the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, blocks the Straits of Malacca. Well, it would be tough for international trade, but we can say, oh, screw you. Russia, the country, Lithuania, I mentioned, and Poland are right next to a large imperial neighbor, which from time to time has conquered and occupied them, like that, and and where there is a certain sentiment for doing the same again sometimes. So we can say, oh, screw it. Well, there goes the value of my apartment. And life becomes really tough for friends of mine, people who are dear to me, and some of them, in fact, whom are related to me by marriage, by having mutual relatives in common. But again, why should we care? That's one thing. Well, okay, so it's hard-hearted. The softer-hearted would say, oh, well, let them come here. Okay, let them, as they're invaded, let the invader have their country and they can just empty it out over here. Or maybe it would just say, listen, I feel really bad for those folks, but, yeah, why should I send my children to die for them? There is a point, there is an argument to that. I'm going to ask you, however, to look at it from their point of view. These are countries, as I say, in which there is a libertarian presence, a libertarian movement. They have hopes, at least, that their independence will last for a while, and how big their country is matters to how hard they hope. In Poland, I actually asked my students, do you think the Russians or the Germans will never want to come and take your land again? And they go, I don't know. I asked the same question in Lithuania, and some Lithuanian students told me, oh yeah, they'll be back. 2 tanks, and we'll all be learning Russian again. In fact, in the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they have a saying. They call their national defense the CNN defense, meaning they hope to hold out long enough to get on CNN, and then boom, before their independence is extinguished again for decades, generations, centuries. Remember, Poland ceased to exist for 120-something years when it was partitioned between Russia, Prussia, and Austria-Hungary. Again, why should we care? They're not, some of us are Polish Americans. I am not, oddly enough, though my children are. Lithuanian Americans and such like that. Maybe we might, and I don't know what I would say. I have cautioned, for example, against fellow Celtic Americans getting involved in that god-awful unholy mess that is hopefully over for now in Northern Ireland and such, because the moral ambiguity was just too weird, and I don't think it did any of us any good. But this might be different, and here's one reason I think so, is no free nation can be so big and so powerful that they can do without friends. And I think the small countries which are experimenting with free institutions and who can be influenced by our political history and the great thinkers of liberty from Madison, Jefferson, Lincoln. Some libertarians are going nuts over that one. I will deal with that later. That they can be influenced to bend their politics more towards liberty. And I would point out there that small countries, the reason it's important to protect the experiments in liberty of small countries is that small countries have less momentum. It is easier for them to make changes and easier to reverse course. In a country the size of ours, 330 million people, which was originally conceived of as an alliance of small nations with what Black's Law Dictionary calls clipped sovereignty. The notion that it would be a federation of republics independent in most things saving foreign policy. That this was a defensive alliance and a free trade alliance, among other things. Now, to that end, there were originally 3 props, and I will deal more extensively with this in another lecture, but 2 of those props were knocked out by the 16th and 17th Amendments, the Income Tax Amendment and the amendment mandating the direct election of senators. There, for reasons, again, I'll go into later at another time. The last prop remaining is the Electoral College, by which the states as states elect the president. But in almost every other respect, we have lost the concept of the states as more or less as independent entities in federation rather than political subdivisions of a great national power. That matters also, again, later. Now, what I'm saying about small countries that conform to certain standards of liberty is in free speech, free press, freedom from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment, security of property, and the laws that provide a framework for trading that, i.e. capitalism, and protection of the rights of minorities. And believe me, this is a sensitive issue in some places like Lithuania, where the largest minorities are Poles and Russians, both of whom have acted imperially towards Lithuania in the past. Poland most recently in 1925, Russia, of course, up to not too many years ago. But again, these are the places where I believe the experiments of liberty are going on right now. In America, we've sort of achieved a certain amount of stasis, which means that liberty will tend to degrade over the long term. And plus the fact that we have very, very large, dense population centers, which is where most government seems to be needed, and where the sentiments for larger, more intrusive government are most dominant. Like that. I happen to live in a rural area. As I've said, we found out that the only reliable predictor of voting patterns in this country is population density. Again, another time. But what I'm saying is, this is one of the things that shapes American libertarianism. The notion we are citizens of a very, very big country. Now, one of the admirable achievements of that country has been to create a common culture out of diverse origins. That seems to be fraying at the edges, but it still holds, I think, in Maine, and may or may not. Who knows? But again, we think of ourselves as eternal and invincible, and oddly enough, people in other countries think so too. I've talked to Eastern Europeans, again, Poles, Lithuanians, Baltics, who know that their country could be erased by a hiccup of history. They live with that. They live with that all their lives, But if you tell them that the United States may be in danger of breaking up and ceasing to exist as a unified nation, they get very uneasy. Like, why do you care? You don't live here. Well, they care because the idea of the United States is a bulwark to people in these countries. Okay, I think I am. Yep, I think I'm going on too long, and I wanted to make this more or less short. But I would also want to say another thing that colors our attitudes is the attitude of, unfortunately, of a lot of libertarians towards Israel, because they just flat don't understand the security issues. Worse, the idea makes them very, very uncomfortable. They don't want to deal with the notion of what you do when you live in a more or less free country that nonetheless has a substantial minority population which is ferociously hostile to the existence of your state and the idea of liberty. I think I will split this off into another presentation, but I'd like you to think about that for a while. This is Steve Brown, Libertarian Heretic. Morning.